So Emily, today we're going to be talking about how to keep our bladder happy and healthy and as normally functioning as we can. So can you tell us your tips for healthy bladder?
Absolutely. So starting with what we put into the bladder and the volumes. So the sort of recommended daily amount of fluid intake is between 1.5 and 2 litres a day of all fluids. That's obviously you want to kind of drink a little bit more if you're doing lots of strenuous exercise or if it's very hot, but those are the rough guidelines. Now, if we're not drinking quite enough, our urine can become very concentrated. And if our urine's concentrated, that can irritate the bladder and cause urinary tract infections and also cause you to need to actually empty your bladder more often. So increased frequency and urgency as well. If you're drinking far too much, it can have the effect that you're obviously needing to empty your bladder a lot more as well. The kind of quality of what we put into the bladder also makes a difference. So any sort of caffeinated drink can irritate the lining of the bladder and cause increased frequency and urgency. 1 in 3 people are caffeine sensitive. Fizzy drinks, alcoholic drinks, drinks that are very sugary or with artificial sweeteners can also irritate the bladder too. So your best thing to drink is water. In terms of how often we're having to empty our bladder, so our bladder can hold sort of 300-400 millilitres before you may have a sort of urge to need to empty. Roughly we should be emptying our bladder sort of between 4 and 8 times a day. It is fairly normal once you're over the age of 25 to need to empty your bladder once at night as well. But 2.5 to 3 hours is kind of what we say is normal.
And if you do get that urgency, so you recognise that you need to go more, have you got some tips of how they might sort of help that?
Absolutely. So just looking at what you're drinking can really help. So trying to avoid any caffeinated drinks, cutting them down gradually so that you don't get any unwanted side effects, replacing them with drinks that are kind for your bladder, like herbal teas, not green tea because that has caffeine in it, red bush tea, water, squash can be really, really helpful, and lots of people just have an instant relief from that. Also just making sure that you are drinking enough. Lots of people with urinary issues start to reduce their fluid intake because they think that if they're not drinking as much, they won't need to go as much. That actually has the opposite effect. As I mentioned before, it makes your urine more concentrated and irritates your bladder, so you end up needing to go more and more and more. What we tend to do when we get people into clinic is do a fluid chart, so look at what they're drinking and how much and how often they're going through the day, and then we can try and retrain their bladder to hold a little bit more. For example, if they're going hourly, we may set them a goal of going every hour and a quarter, and then building it up gradually until they're going sort of the right amount, which is every 2.5 to 3 hours. In order to do that, we need to sort of suppress that urge a little bit initially. So there's lots of techniques to do this. Having good strong pelvic floor muscles can help. If you're engaging your pelvic floor, it will help relax the bladder. But also curling your toes, because some of the nerves that innervate the bladder innervate the calf, so taking the signalling away from the bladder to the calf can be really helpful by curling the toes. Distractions, so a lot of the time people really focus on their bladder and that makes the situation worse. So trying to do something like count backwards from 100 in threes or sort of remember a poem can also be really helpful. Avoiding sort of triggers can sometimes be helpful, so lots of people have that sort of latch key where they come home, they put the key in the front door, that sort of triggers that sort of real urge to need to go. So maybe getting someone else to unlock the door, having some sort of different routine when you arrive home, whether it's sort of going into the garden instead of directly to the door, to sort of change that kind of pathway in the brain a little bit. So yes, so those are sort of the main tips really, but the basic ones initially, so looking at what you're drinking and how much can usually be really, really helpful.
And if someone feels like they're not fully emptying their bladder, I mean, how might that manifest, and how can they, any tips about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So some people will sit to empty their bladder, and they either feel like they're having to strain to empty, or they might not feel like they've fully emptied it. So they might have to go back soon after, so double voiding. They might stand and have a little bit of a dribble, so a kind of post-micturition dribble can also happen. In which case, we may suggest sort of sitting, leaning slightly forward. That can be a good position to sort of empty your bladder. It puts just a little bit more pressure on the anterior wall, can help with the bladder emptying, or sometimes just rocking backwards and forwards. Trying to really relax down through the pelvic floor muscles. Sometimes people get a bit anxious that they're not able to empty their bladder, so the pelvic floor muscles contract, and we actually need them to relax in order to have a good bladder emptying. Just sitting for a little bit longer as well, or sometimes just standing up, having a little walk around and then going back can be helpful too, but it's just really important not to strain.